So, welcome to this evening at the Scientific Symposium, and we're going to be having a study group talking about a very interesting topic, which is what is the present ideological struggle that's holding back the spiritual renaissance on our planet. And so to do that, we're going to read a section from paper 195. It's sections 6, 7, and 8. But I thought to sort of tee it up, I'd first read a section from what we affectionately call the publication mandate. And we at Urantia Foundation do believe these were instructions that were given to us, so we're quite serious about paying attention. It says, at the first paragraph, it says, "We regard the Urantia book as a feature of the progressive evolution of human society. It is not germane to the spectacular episodes of epical revelation, even though it may apparently be timed to appear in the wake of one such revolution in human society. The book belongs to an era immediately to follow the conclusion of the present ideological struggle. That will be the day when men will be willing to seek truth and righteousness. When the chaos of the present confusion has passed, it will be more readily possible to formulate the cosmos of a new and improved era of human relationships. And it is for this better order of affairs on earth that the book has been made ready." So I think that's as much as I will read of the publication mandate. And what we will do is, first of all, let's just ask, throw it around the table here, what do you regard as this present ideological struggle? Do I have any answers from any of our participants? I have a feeling Neil has an idea about this.
Here's the talking stick.
Are you officially calling on me?
I'm calling you out, Neil.
Yeah, I may be a little more pessimistic than many of you. I don't know. I'm anxious to get the viewpoints that you have about what the current state is, but I suppose the people I encounter most often through the internet and forums and just in the day-to-day life, what's disturbing to me is that people seem to be quite jaded and oftentimes just don't care about hearing any alternative to what they believe, even if they believe nothing at all. So I don't know how you move the needle beyond that if a reasonable case cannot be made to a friend.
Yeah.
So I certainly rings true what you said about the next era is when this book would have a greater play. Yeah.
And how would you, in a sentence or two, define the present ideological struggle?
Well, I think materialism. They do say in the section 6 there that don't be panicky, and the worst of the materialist age is over. I wonder though if at the time of the writing of this, some things have happened that maybe they didn't anticipate, and maybe that this is going to go on for a little longer than they thought.
Interesting.
In my opinion, I think certainly the World War and the rise of totalitarianism and what happened in China and Russia and really throughout the entire 20th century, but even after the 30s, may have had a profound influence on people. Also, the computer age. There seems to be scientists and philosophers of mind seem to be enamored with the idea of the computational theory of mind. Right. They see a computer, hey, a neuron fires or it doesn't, a transistor fires or it doesn't, and they seem to have jumped to this conclusion: the computer is a brain, a mind. Right. The brain is a computer, and it's just. I've had some computer science, and I just shake my head at that. I don't know how you can buy into that, but it seems to have a grip on people.
When was it written?
When was
the mandate?
Sometime in the 40s, late 40s, yeah.
Late 40s, yeah.
And so, so your perspective on the current situation is very interesting. So yeah, I will tell you, with my students at the University of Nevada, I ask them right off the bat, how many of you trust our political institutions? And I've asked hundreds now, 0. How many of you trust our economic institutions? 0. And I've asked again hundreds of these students, and I've asked, how many of you trust our religious institutions? You want to guess, Ralph, how many trust?
About the same as the others.
1 in the last
Okay.
many, many years. And he was pretty evangelical Christian. So it's an indication that there's an issue here, a difficulty. And so let's go ahead and read a little bit. George, will you start us off? Do you have this section, or is it? Actually, let's start with Ralph.
Okay.
Actually, George's book has been clipped.
You can take this.
There's a paragraph that somebody clipped. So whoever's here on Tuesday nights, I want you to observe your participants at the study group.
Right. Yeah, section number 6 is entitled Materialism. Scientists have unintentionally precipitated mankind into a materialistic panic. They have started an unthinking run on the moral bank of the ages, but this bank of human experience has vast spiritual resources. It can stand the demands being made upon it. Only unthinking men become panicky about the spiritual assets of the human race. When the materialistic, secular panic is over, the religion of Jesus will not be found bankrupt. The spiritual bank of the kingdom of heaven will be paying out faith, hope, and moral security to all who draw upon it in his name.
Go ahead and read the next one.
No matter what the apparent conflict between materialism and the teachings of Jesus may be, you can rest assured that in the ages to come, the teachings of the Master will fully triumph. In reality, true religion cannot become involved in any controversy with science. It is in no way concerned with material things. Religion is simply indifferent to, but sympathetic with, science, while it supremely concerns itself with the scientist.
Thank you, Ralph. So we'll just take a pause. If anybody has any thoughts about this, I would encourage you to share.
Well, what do you think? You encounter probably a greater cross-section than many of us.
Well, I have a friend who's a therapist, and he...
I'm sorry, we do need to pass the staff.
Oh, this does not work?
Why don't you just repeat his question?
This is not working?
Yours is, but
Oh.
Neil's didn't.
Yeah, so...
You don't need this one. You have one.
Yes.
Just repeat.
But Neil,
repeat
so
his
the
question.
question was, Neil asked the question about what's my observation from what I can see. And I'll give you a story of a physicist.
And I was asking a lot about your colleagues, not so much your students.
Oh, my colleagues. Well, the only reason I get to teach at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas is because I teach at night when I can't be seen. So I would say the vast majority of my colleagues are secular materialists, and that they have adopted an atheistic point of view, and that values are relative, and there are no such thing as absolute values. And so I would say that's the predominant or prevailing attitude in virtually every philosophy department across the country, and maybe around the world. And what I would also say is that most of these students are required to take courses from us philosophy professors, so they're getting a heavy dose. Mm-hmm. So when I was an undergraduate, I was asked in a philosophy of religion course to write a paper on the morality of Jesus. And I had to rewrite the paper 7 times because Professor Tooley insisted that Jesus was not immoral, but amoral. And so finally, at the end of the 7th paper, we sat down in his office, and he said, "I'm going to pass you out of the course, but I disagree with you." And I told him I respectfully disagreed with him. Mm-hmm. But that's how difficult it is in the current scene. And this was at Stanford University, which is a pretty good university. And you would anticipate an open mind, but as you've observed in your presentation, Neil, most of these philosophers are pretty dogmatic when it comes to this
Right, so
appreciation.
I was coming at it from even a slightly different angle. I know what they believe, but if you were in a social situation with any of them, would you feel free to talk about what you believed?
Absolutely.
You would.
Absolutely.
So they all know what your viewpoint is.
Most of them.
Okay.
I'm a part-time instructor. Unless you're full-time, they really don't know who you are,
I see.
especially when you come out at night. So yeah, it's an awkward environment, but what I always tell my students at the beginning of the class is I tell them the story of the blind man and the elephant. And I refer to Edgar Brightman, who's one of the authors or source material for the Urantia book. And Edgar Brightman, who was the president of the American Philosophical Association, said that philosophy should in some fashion address all accessible experience. And that means all. And so in the story of the blind man and the elephant, what we know is that each person had a piece of the elephant. And John Stuart Mill said, to the extent that we affirm our own personal experience, we are generally correct in our observations. But to the extent we deny the personal experience of someone else, we're generally wrong. And so that's my rebuttal to any of my fellow professors when they ask about, well, how can you believe that given the evidence? So it's a tough fight right now, and it is an ideological struggle.
Yeah, so just one more comment. You originally said, you asked your students what their opinion, what their faith was on our political system,
Trust.
our economic system, trust, and our churches. And they had a low opinion. But they probably don't have a low opinion of the university environment.
Well, they do.
They do.
Most of them are just trying to get through to a career.
But not for the reason we see.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I would just like to add to that discussion, if I may, that to select out universities is to select out a very specific and I think non-representative group in general. I come from a very different background. I was in a large multi-specialty clinic working with a large number of physicians from around the world. It was a very interesting group of people. They were from Asia and Africa and of course the US and Europe. And our experience in working with patients gives us insights into patients in the way they deal with very serious, challenging situations. And in many times, you know, there's that statement in the book that most people, when pressed hard enough, will pray. And that is a common reaction of people when they are faced with a life-threatening situation. So in my case, we all observed the fact that that our patients are almost all dualist. And so as physicians, we're forced to face this, you know, almost on a daily basis. And my colleagues, you know, they observe this and they recognize the reality of the spiritual aspect. So I think that maybe we're at the other end of the spectrum in contrast to the academic world.
That could be. I'm married to a physician as well, and her experience is quite different than yours.
I like to think that we're, of us as evolutionary beings and experiential beings, and we're at a phase of our evolution where we're we've just hit the scientific age. That's the age that we live in the last couple hundred years. You know, that before that it was magical thinking. Science, there was no explanation for things. So I think we're in the broader arc. We're just at a phase of evolution, and not that's where it says don't get in a panic. It's great that we have the scientific age. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of change to absorb quickly, and we're tasked. Delegation of it's up to us to try to figure a way through this, and I think we've got each generation has its own challenges, and we have ours. But it's going to take some time. I think we should think in periods of like 100, 200, 300 years. It's not that long in this evolution, and we're less civilized than we realize. I think we've advanced materially. You know, they say we advance quicker that way than we haven't grown proportionately in our spiritual nature. So we're just in a kind of an unusual adjustment, and it might take us 100 or 200 years. If the planet survives and everything, I think we're following an arc when you look at our history that, no, it's not time to hit the panic button yet. Right. Just
Very good.
Well, let me play the devil's advocate here a bit, because I think it's important to understand where this materialism comes from. Physicists and scientists are saying that our brain is a mechanism, part of the material universe, which is all they can see. And it's energy in and energy out. And energy is uniform. Everything must do what the energy laws say. If I drop this napkin, it must fall. Doesn't have any choice about it. It falls. And since your brain and my brain and everybody's brain are part of the physical universe, we're all subject to antecedent causation. There's no way to break in to that energy process. Some people believe that we can somehow transcend that, but they don't see any evidence of that. I can remember a Dilbert cartoon that says, I've looked into my brain and I see no soul. And then the person who's interviewing him says, well, then you're appropriate. You have the appropriate properties for this job. I see. I've looked in there and I see nothing. So, you're hired. So it's that attitude, that assertion that we are in the material universe and there's no way to break out of it and have some kind of a external way to make a difference that isn't already determined. And if you take that to its extreme, it means that everything that's happened from the beginning of time has all been determined by the past energies. You know, this has to fall. The question is, I don't have to drop it. And, well, that's my attitude. But the attitude of many materialists is that you just don't have any choice about it because you're part of the energy system. So I think we need to address that question. How do we transcend the energy system? Well, I think it's our common experience that we do have a certain amount of choice. They don't want to make that assumption, but it's all of our experiences. So why not make it a postulate? But the physicists and the scientists want to push a philosophy that says there's nothing else, even as they claim to be discoverers of the facts of nature. They think that we don't have any choice about it. This book says every discovery is an example of both the determinism that's there. Whenever you discover it, something, it wouldn't be a thing unless you could discover it, but you were free to do it or not. So we have to deal with that if we're going to answer materialism. We need to show that we can have some kind of a way to break into the antecedent causation argument.
Thank you, Phil. Rosalie?
You know, I was just thinking about the lives that we're all leading now. And it just seems that we're just trying to get by day, hour by hour, with all our chores, our to-dos. And we don't really have the luxury and have trouble making time for that luxury to get deep into it ourselves or our spirits, because by the end of the day you're so exhausted, all you can think of is, all right, I want to get to sleep. We have all this media, the TV, our phones, and it just seems that what is supposed to make us so interconnected is actually making us almost like automatons, where we really cannot really get in touch with ourselves. There's just too much to do. I know how I am. I'm retired, and I'm more busy now than ever before, and I'm trying to figure out how to calculate this and how to get this stupid thing working and how to take care of something that broke in the house. And our lives, in some respect, I think are harder than the caveman's, who just had very limited types of things to do to survive. But I think we're really just trying to survive.
It's a very good observation. It's a very good observation. Let's read a couple more paragraphs here. So, Tom, are you available to read?
Here, you need the.
Or actually, I think George is now clear to read.
Right.
clear.
Are you
George,
clear?
need the
I'm
talking
clear for
stick?
that.
The pursuit of mere knowledge.
All right.
Why don't you read a couple paragraphs there?
Excuse me. The pursuit of mere knowledge without the attendant interpretation of wisdom and the spiritual insight of religious experience eventually leads to pessimism and human despair. A little knowledge is truly disconcerting. At the time of this writing, the worst of the materialistic age is over. The day of a better understanding is already beginning to dawn. The higher minds of the scientific world are no longer wholly materialistic in their philosophy, but the rank and file of the people still lean in that direction as a result of former teachings. But this age of physical realism is only a passing episode in man's life on Earth. Modern science has left true religion, the teachings of Jesus as translated in the lives of his believers, untouched. All science has done is to destroy the childlike illusions of the misinterpretations of life.
Thank you, George. So I think one of the issues is how we limit our field of vision. And as was said earlier today, we generally find in the world what we look for. And so I think, following Rosalie's thought, most of my students are pretty traumatized. And I have them read Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, and then they write a paper. And I will tell you, probably 75 to 80% of the papers I get are papers expressing despair and trauma. And so the book says, right, the social ship has sailed out of the harbor, right, Ralph?
Mm-hmm.
So we're on the high seas, and it's a difficult moment right now.
And it won't calm down for 1,000 years.
Won't calm down, and religion is the stabilizing influence, the moral compass that will carry us forward. So most of them have not had exposure to religion. Most of them I ask basic Sunday school questions, and they don't know the parables, they don't know the stories of Jesus. They're just not familiar with any of it because they haven't been taught. And they live in worlds where there's a significant amount of stress and trauma. And so given that ballpark, it's no surprise that you have a situation like we're reading right now. So any other thoughts before we move on? George?
I wanted to respond to your original question. I've always assumed that the struggle was with materialism, but of late I'm beginning to wonder if really the larger struggle isn't with relativism. Mm-hmm. It seems at the turn of the last century, the absolute died. You know, just a few years before the 1900s, you had Hegel with his metaphysics, and then after Einstein's special theory of relativity, all of a sudden, any talk of any sort of absolute was considered absurd.
Yes.
The absolute is absurd. So if the absolute is philosophically absurd, then so is God. So I think I'm coming to think now that maybe that's the larger issue, the philosophy of absolute relativism.
I view that as a fallout of I view that as a fallout of materialism. In materialists, there is no absolute moral value. There's no true north in a moral compass. I don't know how you can envision one. You get into the infinite regress problem again, because if you're a secular humanist and you want to bring in another precept into your manifesto, you have to justify it. How do you justify it? With some other precept that's been adopted. Well, how did you adopt that one? And on and on. There's nothing to halt the regress in materialism. With an absolute, there is. You can simply say, the feeling I have that the golden rule is correct comes from an endowment by our Creator. And that's a way to halt the regress. But so I view the whole relativism, that there's nothing, no thing is better than another thing, is just a fall out of that. I think that's part of the whole postmodernism. I think there was a philosopher in France, Jacques Derrida. Right?
Derrida, yeah.
Was probably one of the key proponents of that.
He was, but it goes back to the days of Socrates. And there's a lovely scene where Socrates is out in the marketplace, and he's dealing, his ideological struggle is the same as ours, and that's 2,500 years ago. He was dealing with a group of individuals called the Sophists, who believe basically relativism, and were basically materialists, and believe that anything goes. And really their preoccupation with is how do I increase my bank account? And when Socrates leans over and says to one of them, come over here, we're talking about something really interesting. We're talking about the best way to live your life. The sophist says to Socrates, whose son is there, and he's very upset because his son is listening to Socrates, I don't want any of your claptrap. And Socrates, as you know, is convicted on both the charge of impiety and corrupting the youth. And so I'm just glad I live in the 21st century, because I probably would be killed too. This has been a struggle since the dawn of civilization. And Democritus, who was the one who gave us atomic theory and was a materialist and adopted by Epicurus, basically said the only meaning in our life is pleasure, maximizing our pleasure and minimizing our pain. Moral qualities, aesthetic qualities, truth issues, these are not issues that are even worth considering. Bertrand Russell said, in fact, they're nonsense. And he meant that in a literal way. They cannot be observed, therefore they are not worthy of conversation. That's where we're at. And that's the struggle. And I think, Rosalie, it's a big reason why there's a lot of trauma in these young kids' lives. because their parents have really not understood that there's something more to life than just pleasure.
Well, the psychologist.
I got a couple thoughts about morals, and I want to stand up for the humanists. I think there are people that are, maybe they don't believe in God, but I think that they are living a different type of spiritual lives anyways. I have a good friend, his bumper sticker says, I'm a humanist, I believe in good. And his life, these people are highly moral, and when we get on one side and say, I'm afraid I don't want to see this judgmental opinion that because we believe in God, we're more moral than some other people, because our bunch is not always, as of service to others, and I just want to soften that us and them kind of barrier. The spirit of truth works in people. A lot of people are disappointed in religions these days. It's the nuns is the growing part of the population. That's a good step. That's a wonderful step. If people are disillusioned with the church, that has to happen before they replace it with something better. But I just want to be cautionary about saying, when we talk about they have no morals or they're living their life.
Right, right. Yeah.
I don't think anybody said that.
Let me just comment on it. You're absolutely correct. I know many secular people, my in-laws, for example, who are very fine people, do a lot of good. But I'm just saying that the broad brush, the big picture view, the collective view, if you adopt that view that there is nothing, that only avoiding pain and pursuing pleasure is the ultimate goal, then it's hard to justify to yourself, if you're a materialist, to believe, if you think about it, the cause for good. And you can
rule can be believed by a materialist.
It's, according to materialists, it's just a random configuration in the brain. If you think about it in that context, how can you say that it has any value, that it's important? There's no transcendent cause for it. There's no transcendent accountability for it, and there's no reason for believing that it's better than anything else. It's just a configuration in your brain. I know they believe that because, as you said, they have an endowment that they're overlooking.
They don't know. If they say they don't know, I know a lot of people say, I just don't know. And they live wonderful lives. And
Of course.
They're growing.
Of course.
Absolutely. It's that maybe flicker of faith
Yeah.
that they're talking about. Okay, that may be that one. We don't know, because that's between them and their adjuster or whatever.
Yeah, they have
okay,
adjusters.
and so they're still our brother and sister, and we still have to have compassion for them, right? So
Absolutely.
that's all that counts.
I think Rosalie had something she was going to say.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. There are psychiatrists and psychologists doing studies now trying to deal with people who are in a lot of pain, both physically and emotionally. And, they're saying that those people who do volunteer work, who help others, are the most joyous people, not the ones who are multimillionaires, who can do things with their money, but they're not getting real pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think more and more people are, because of the trauma in their lives and because they're so frustrated, are trying to look for happiness. And they're now reaching some new conclusions as to what pleasure really is, and that it's giving of yourself.
Yes.
And I think this is a trend now, because almost everybody now sees a therapist, and they're trying to answer the questions, because we're in such a tense and difficult era right now, and making it so much harder, whether you have money or not, to live a life which you are comfortable with in an emotional state. Because people are emotionally now not really happy.
Right.
And so whether you call it religion or the teaching them something, at least doing these moral things, it does not necessarily have to be in the name of religion, but religion does promote that.
Right.
So there has to be more of that idea going around to convince people to live their lives in a different way.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rosalie. Let's read a little more, if we could. And
Here, who's gonna read?
yeah, Tom, are you up?
I'm in. Start with science.
Yeah. Why don't you read three of those paragraphs? You got three.
You need the.
No. Wait a minute, is it science is a quantitative experience? Okay. Science is a quantitative experience. Religion, a qualitative experience as regards man's life on earth. Science deals with phenomena. Religion with origins, values, and goals. To assign causes as an explanation of physical phenomena is to confess ignorance of ultimates, and, in the end, only leads the scientist straight back to the first great cause, the universal father of paradise. The violent swing from an age of miracles to an age of machines has proved altogether upsetting to man. The cleverness and dexterity of the false philosophies of mechanism belie their very mechanistic contentions. The fatalistic agility of the mind of a materialist forever disproves his assertions that the universe is a blind and purposeless energy phenomenon.
Yeah, and go ahead and read the next one.
All right.
If you would.
The mechanistic naturalism of some supposedly educated men and the thoughtless secularism of the man in the street are both exclusively concerned with things. They are barren of all real values, sanctions, and satisfactions of a spiritual nature, as well as being devoid of faith, hope, and eternal assurances. One of the great troubles with modern life is that man thinks he is too busy to find time for spiritual meditation and religious devotion.
There you go. Josh, you have something to say about this, I see.
Thank you very much. Man thinks he is too busy to find time for spiritual meditation and religious devotion. And then also looking at this first line on paper 2076, for those listening in, this unplanned run on the bank. What if I told you all that I found out some information from somebody who's in the banking business, and is really serious about this, and that tomorrow there's going to just be a few $1,000s left in the bank. And even though you're here in Chicago, well, whatever you could do, please get to an ATM or do whatever you can, get your money out tonight. Don't even go to. It was not true information. Mm-hmm. There'd be an unthinking run on the bank. Now this happens from time to time. There have been bank runs, and people get panicky, and they think the resources are running thin. And it says here, guess who unintentionally started this stampede, this run on the bank? It was the scientists. But they did it unintentionally. Mm-hmm. They didn't realize that was what was going to happen. And so they led us out of the age of miracles into the age of machines. And now we're in this quandary that we're working our way out of now. But this thing about finding time for spiritual meditation, I wanted to ask Rebecca in Tulsa if you have a comment about that. Hi, Rebecca. It's daughter Rebecca in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And this subject, Rebecca, if you can unmute, and just tell us about finding time for spiritual meditation and religious devotion in your family.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Oh, well, I think as a family or personally or both?
Both, but personally first, yeah.
Okay, well, I think for me it's important to praise my Creator every day. And the way I do it is I start my day and I walk through. I have this little forest in the backyard, and I walk through and I praise God, and then I wait and listen. It's just an important part of my day. As a family, I have 4 kids, ages 7 all the way to 15. So you can imagine it's hard to spend time, together in that way. But we have dinner and breakfast together every day. And we have prayer time and talk about our day. And hopefully my kids just see who I am and my relationship with my Creator. And so.
Well said. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining in. Thanks for taking time for spiritual meditation and religious devotion with the grandkids. Appreciate it.
Well, and I often ask people, if the Creator of the universe were to knock on your door, Neil, and say, "Hey, Neil, you got 20 minutes for me this morning?" You would say, "I think," of course. But
I would say definitely.
yes, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Problem is, my neighbors might be shutting the door,
Yeah.
pointing to the no solicitation sign.
So the question is do we each around this table have 20 minutes for the Creator of the universe? And I often say, my teacher said, twice a day. Once is maintenance, twice is improvement, Rebecca. So 20 minutes twice a day, and then occasionally a retreat where you dive much deeper. And when we think about our priorities in life, I think Rodin says it well. Look now to your master. He's even now in the hills garnering spiritual energy and wisdom for the activities of the day. And I think as a community, we need to own up to the fact that we probably could do more in this realm. We could probably spend more time with the Creator in silence and experience that transforming and healing quality of worship. I will tell you one story, which is of a physicist who was meeting with a friend of mine who reads the Urantia book, and his life was pretty messed up. And my friend, the therapist, said, "Well, your life is pretty messed up, and you don't believe in God, do you?" He said, "No, absolutely not. I'm an atheist." He said, "But you try just about anything. Your life is so messed up." And the physicist said, "Yeah, I probably would if it might help me." And my friend said, "Well, I want you to try something. I want you to take 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the afternoon, and I want you just to put your mind in a place where you are communing or connecting, and let's just assume, you don't have to say there is, but let's assume there's a God, communing with God." And he said, "Furthermore, I want to suggest to you, you're a physicist, and you believe in the scientific method." And the physicist said, "Yeah, you got me on that one." He said, "So I'm posing to you an experiment, which is 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening for 2 weeks until we see each other again." And the physicist said, "Well, my life really is screwed up enough. I will try this." And so 2 weeks later, he shows up at the appointment, and he says, "I don't know what this is, but I like it." A month later, he comes back and he says at his next appointment, "I'm not giving this up. This is doing something." A year later, he's a deacon in the local church. So we often misunderstand this word faith. Faith is assuming the truth of the love of God and acting upon that assumption. And oftentimes in our secular society, we think that's to go out and join United Way and do something, which it may be part. But the most important part is developing a relationship with the Creator. So if you're ever confronted with that situation, please feel free to share that story, because I think it's a powerful demonstration that this is not blind faith. This is not belief. This, I'm telling you to take the invitation, try it, see what's going on, and tell me how it's going. And invariably, when I've done this with my students and other people, they all come back and say, "This is good." I had one lady who came in, we had a prayer circle, and when she closed her eyes, tears came down her cheeks. And after a few sessions, I said, "What's going on?" She said, "I was physically and emotionally abused as a child," and she was with Cain. She said, "I'm in my second abusive marriage." After 2 years of doing this prayer, of doing worship together, no more Cain, no more abusive relationship, she was strong like bull. This is how faith works, and this is what Jesus promised us. And if we could, sincerely invite people to that quality of experience, I think we would begin to see that transformation. So any other thoughts before we move on? Phil?
Bennett on the screen.
Oh, Bennett. My friend Bennett. You're on mute, Bennett.
I got you, Bennett. Okay, Bennett.
Thanks, everybody, for everything you're doing here today. I wish I could have seen more of it, but, Gard, I must confess that I've been in your conversation of 20 minutes twice a day on several blessed occasions, and I utterly fail to comply most of the time, but yet, I probably spend more than 1 to 2 hours a day in that contemplation. I just fail to do it in an orderly manner. So that's what that is. But what I'd like to suggest to everybody, I similarly feel with you regarding what goes on in the world today. And aside from the plague of cell phones and texting, which I'm just as much a victim as a perpetrator, the bottom line is that there is more good happening in the world today than there ever has been in volume and quality. People are doing things that matter, and if they aren't, they want to. And I've also noted that there's just as many atheists doing Christian things as the Christians who don't quite get there because of whatever they're hung up with. And while we're certainly on the uphill leg of this journey, and probably will be for the rest of all of our lives, the fact is that we need to trust the things that we can't see and the things that don't show up on TV, for the simple reason that they're not sexy and they don't play well on the air. But the fact is, this doesn't go without notice of the common and decent men and women in this world. And I remain more impressed and more faithful with the things that are happening today, in spite of the fact that I can't see most of them happening. And the fact that we sit around a circle every once in a while and we contemplate this is well worthwhile. But we also have to trust that a lot of things are happening quite without our knowledge or without our permission. I will leave it there.
Thank you, Bennett.
Thanks, Bennett. It's good to see you and hear your voice.
Bruce, are you up?
I would like to add something to that. We all have phones, and recently I put on there a reminder every day to do just that. It comes on at 4 o'clock. I'm going to put another one on earlier in the day for 20 minutes. Because sometimes 4 o'clock some comes and I'm involved with something else. So, and then I would like to read the next paragraph because, well, I'm a mathematician.
Please do.
Materialism reduces man to a soulless automaton and constitutes him merely an arithmetic symbol, finding a helpless place in the mathematical formula of an unromantic and mechanistic universe. But whence comes all this vast universe of mathematics without a master mathematician? Science may expatiate on the conservation of matter, but religion validates the conservation of men's souls. It concerns their experience with spiritual realities and eternal values. The materialistic socialist of today surveys a community, makes a report thereon, and leaves the people as he found them. 1900 years ago, unlearned Galileans surveyed Jesus giving his life as a spiritual contribution to man's inner experience, and then went out and turned the whole Roman Empire upside down.
Beautiful. Any thoughts, Mr. Mathematician?
I had a comment on what you had said, your anecdote. It's been my personal experience and my assumption all along that belief formed a barrier to faith.
Mm-hmm.
Your story would seem to be at odds with that,
Mm-hmm.
right? What do you think? I mean, that was one case that.
Well, I think most people, as we were talking, are fairly traumatized. And as most of my students, I tell them this course in philosophy is just a game show. Door number 1 is fear, anxiety, and anger, and door number 2 is love, joy, and peace. Galatians 5:22. These are the fruits of the Spirit. And I said, during the course of this semester, we're going to try to figure out some strategies. And I say, here's your first exam. I want you, and I don't want you to raise your hand, but if you do, see me after class. How many of you want to stay in door number 1? Fear, anxiety, and anger. Most of them have come to the belief that that's the way the world is. They don't have any belief in the assumption that love, joy, and peace is their birthright, which is what we're told in the Urantia book, that love is actually the fabric of the universe. So again, this is not something that my fellow philosophy professors would profess, but it's something I know as a result of my experience. And what I will tell you is about halfway through the semester, I can start to see the lights going on in these kids. And they're starting to get excited about the conversations around values. And that to me is all the Urantia book is. It's an invitation to an experience. Mm-hmm. An experience of the cosmos, as we've been talking today, an experience of the inner aspect of truth that dwells within each of us. As Immanuel Kant said, there's only 2 things that bring me to awe: the starry sky above and the moral law within, right? And so, again, all we can do is invite. We can't fix anybody. I've learned that after 66 years. Anybody else have that experience? But I know who can fix them, and does every time, and that's why that physicist was so willing to engage the experiment. And most people are kind of like that physicist. They've been fairly traumatized. So I think it's, if you can, Parker Palmer, a wonderful Quaker, says the soul is shy. And if you can get somebody to begin to articulate from the place of soul, even though they may not say they have a soul or want to talk about a soul, but to get them to talk authentically from that space, then I think you have the opportunity for an invitation. And I think that's why Jesus kept going back to Jerusalem, because he knew there were just a few more who'd take the invitation, just a few more of those Pharisees and Sadducees who'd take the invitation. And the story of Josiah the blind man, I think, tells it all, right? It comes back to personal experience. And when you've been blind all your life and now you see, who's not going to follow this guy named Jesus, right? So let's, if there's no other thoughts, let's continue to read. And I believe, Bruce, you were next.
Okay. The one that starts with "but religious leaders." Is that where you are? But religious leaders are making a great mistake when they try to call upon modern men to spiritual battle with the trumpet blast of the Middle Ages. Religion must provide itself with new and up-to-date slogans. Neither democracy nor any other political panaceas will take the place of spiritual progress. False religions may represent an evasion of reality, but Jesus in his gospel introduced mortal man to the very entrance upon an eternal reality of spiritual progression. Should I go on and one? Or?
Yeah, go ahead and read the next one. Actually, read down to the break.
To say that mind emerged from matter explains nothing. If the universe were merely a mechanism and mind were unapart from matter, we would never have two differing interpretations of any observed phenomenon. The concepts of truth, beauty, and goodness are not inherent in either physics or chemistry. A machine cannot know, much less know truth, hunger for righteousness, and cherish goodness. Science may be physical, but the mind of the truth-discerning scientist is at once supermaterial. Matter knows not truth, neither can it love mercy, nor delight in spiritual realities. Moral convictions based on spiritual enlightenment and rooted in human experience are just as real and certain as mathematical deductions based on physical observations, but on another and higher level. If men were only machines, they would react more or less uniformly to a material universe. Individuality, much less personality, would be non-existent.
So what do you think the trumpet blasts of the Middle Ages were, or are?
Repent.
Anybody?
Yeah. Repent.
Go ahead. Amplify.
Yeah, amplify.
Well, repent. Stop sinning. Repent.
Yeah.
You know.
Or go to hell.
Or go to hell. You know. I mean, they made the choice very clear.
Right.
So it really wasn't much of a choice. It was sort of like, do you want chocolate or something very distasteful?
Right. Right. Well, yeah. Well.
Make sacrifices is another one.
Make sacrifices.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I will add one more, which is that in the Middle Ages, you were not regarded as a citizen unless you were religious.
Mm-hmm.
You were not allowed to question the dogma of the church. You were not allowed to be a free thinker. And so you lived in a culture where if you wanted to be somebody, it would be to be the parish priest or to be the bishop or to be a cardinal. In that culture, right, everything revolved around religion. But as we know, with the Enlightenment, the pendulum swung back towards science and materialism. So I think what we're experiencing now is that we've seen the bankruptcy of just the one-sided, I think they call it the one-eyed perspective of religion or the one-eyed perspective of science. And I think we're beginning to realize the bankruptcy of just that one-sidedness. And so I think there's a huge opportunity, and I do think there's a lot of young people who are spiritual but not religious, and they have a real yearning. And as Jesus said, all it takes is a flicker of faith, a little bit of humility, and a yearning for these values, and you're there. Yeah. So any other thoughts? Do we need some more chocolate cake? Yeah.
I love that explanation.
Yeah.
Oh, look, there's
Look
the
at that.
grandchildren. Ah, look at those.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
We like that picture.
Yeah, show
Hi.
us more. Oh, look, she's beautiful.
Girls?
Yeah, great.
Wow.
Yeah, we got to, yeah.
Beautiful grandchildren.
That's right.
Good God.
Josh did good work.
Very nice.
Good to see them. I love that explanation, Gard. That's a real. We have secular totalitarianism, or we have ecclesiastical totalitarianism, and both of them have been a great scourge. And we can't call people to spiritual battle with those formulas. It's going to take something else, and fortunately, we have it here.
Yes, yes. Well, I have a friend who threw up images of the world leaders in 2009. So just imagine who was in charge in the world: Great Britain, France, Germany, America. in 2009, and then he threw it up, the world leaders in 2019.
Oh my goodness.
So secular totalitarianism is alive and well.
It's back.
It's alive and well. But I want to suggest that it's the death throes of secular totalitarianism. I think people, if you look at what's going on in Hong Kong and other places, they're finally waking up and saying it is the people who control this, not that person. Yeah.
I have a friend that some of you may know who's a Urantia book student named Charles McLafferty, who's at in Virginia.
Yeah.
And Charles posed when he saw, because he was in Charlottesville when everything happened there. Of course, he and his wife Deborah were very horrified. And he said that he began to think about what was actually going on. And he said, you know, perhaps this is the time where we're really offered a line that we can no longer straddle on the fence, that we're going to have to decide what side we're going to come down on, you know, if we are going to truly accept the gospel as Jesus stated it, or we were going to move over to, you know, the secular materialism and deny our brotherhood. And he saw that firsthand. He saw that as the question that was presented to him in Charlottesville. And at the time that Charlottesville happened, I happened to have a friend that was a Holocaust survivor. And I called my friend Ruth, and I said, Ruth, I'm so sorry that you have had to see this, to actually, you know, experience this. And she said to me, you know, she thanked me for my call, and that, you know, and then she said, Margie, this is the way it all starts. And that, to me, I found to be very, very chilling and a warning, but yet it started a conversation with other people that I think that is very important. And then Charles and I had this discussion about how he thinks it's literally a time, not just because of our one political situation, but that is a time perhaps in history where we need to actually declare ourselves, you know, are we what we really are, or are we not, you know, and so anyway, that was just my recent experience within the last couple of years.
And Charles and I had a similar conversation. He's a member of the American Psychological Association, and he had something of a debate on the floor because everybody was saying nature or nurture, nature or nurture. And Charles said, I got up and said, what about choice? Nature, nurture, choice. And again, this is the materialistic assumption. There is no choice. It's either nature or nurture, so we put the kid in a box, as Zimbardo did at Stanford, and we assume with good inputs we get good outputs. And I believe they didn't turn out so well. So let's read a little more, unless there's any more comment. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, Dave.
Oh, Steve.
The fact of the absolute mechanism of paradise at the center of the universe of universes, in the presence of the unqualified volition of the second source and center, makes forever certain that determiners are not the exclusive law of the cosmos. Materialism is there, but it is not exclusive. Mechanism is there, but it is not the unqualified. Determinism is there, but it is not alone. The finite universe of matter would eventually become uniform and deterministic, but for the combined presence of mind and spirit. The influence of the cosmic mind constantly injects spontaneity into even the material world. Freedom or initiative in any realm of existence is directly proportional to the degree of spiritual influence and cosmic mind control that is, in human experience, the degree of the actuality of doing the Father's will. And so, when you once start out to find God, that is the conclusive proof that God has already found you. The sincere pursuit of goodness, beauty, and truth leads to God, and every scientific discovery demonstrates the existence of both freedom and uniformity in the universe. The discoverer was free to make the discovery. The thing discovered is real and apparently uniform, or else it could not have become known as a thing.
So what emerges from that reading? That was very good. Thanks, Dave. What emerges from that reading? Yeah.
The focus is on divine reality values, not just on goodness,
right,
which has been the classic approach of religion on this planet,
right,
is to focus exclusively, like the Jewish religion,
right,
focused exclusively on the goodness of God,
reality, yeah,
ignoring the beauty of art and the philosophy and science.
Philosophy, yeah.
And I don't think that's going to work anymore.
Yeah.
I think somehow we have to use this book to make a whole appeal that is both true, beautiful, and good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very nice, George. And I have a friend who, Carol Schindler, some of you may know, but she studied with Robin Williams in Chicago, and she is an expert at improv. Anybody know the law of improv? I think this section suggests what the law of improv suggests. That whenever you're responding to what's going on stage, you never say no, but. Mm-hmm. You always say yes, and. Mm-hmm. So with the philosophical materialists who are in our philosophy departments, you say yes, and this is what I get. Materialism is there, but it's not exclusive, mm-hmm, right? Mechanism is there, but it is not unqualified. Determinant is there, but it's not alone. So yes, these little experiments where the hand is waving, that's kind of cute, but it doesn't quite catch the whole arena of what's going on in our existence, does it? Mm-hmm. By a long shot. And so if you limit the premise of your conversation to such an experiment or to such an understanding of how things work, then by definition you have cornered yourself in the realm of a materialistic philosophy. You're dead in the water. And that's why, again, I think you need to invite people to a question, which is, and I ask my students, who many of them are atheists or agnostics, does truth and beauty and goodness, do you think those are important values? And invariably they all say yes. And so that invitation, right, is, I think, again, the important thing, is to invite them to an experience of water. Get them to watch, is it Dr. Emoto? Who is the one?
Well, he's one of them.
One of them.
Yeah.
Just the magnificence, miracle of water. Mm-hmm. How you get something that burns here and something that burns here, put them together and it puts out something that burns.
Yeah, it's pretty astounding.
That's pretty astounding. So any other thoughts? You are a quiet group. I think there was too much chocolate cake tonight, Bennett. They all had chocolate cake, Bennett, and I think they're on the out. Phil. Here, Marjorie.
Oh, okay. Would you like me to read next?
Phil's.
Phil's going to read
say,
next. Oh, sorry.
I think what this reading we just made was, don't forget the person.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the scientist has this outside world that they, deal with, and they make decisions. They make discoveries. but they forget themselves. They don't see themselves as part of the whole universe. And so when they make these decisions, they sort of say, well, you know, they forget that, and they make the discovery, and they think only of the discovery, the thing, and they forget, except in a personal sense, that somebody made a choice to discover.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we got to put the whole picture of both the discovery and the discoverer into the whole picture.
Beautiful. Ralph, did you have something you wanted to share?
Well, I was just thinking, on the other side of the coin, when the scientist has made a major discovery, he certainly is quite willing to be in the picture to get the Nobel Prize or whatever else. But you're so right that they tend to dismiss that process that went into the choice they made to make the discovery, to choose to run the experiment or whatever. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Well, it says, I think in the early part of the book, that personality is the supreme revelation of God to the universe. Personality. And what I think everybody around this table understands is the concept of personality in the Urantia book is not the concept of personality you're going to learn at the university. Earthworms have personality according to those psychology courses.
Has a great personality.
Well, and I will tell you, this is I think one of the clarion calls of the fifth epoch of Revelation, is to clarify the concept of personality. In the 20s and 30s, there was a school called the Personalists, and Pope John Paul II was a personalist from Poland. And Ralph Tyler Flewelling was the chair of philosophy at USC, and he had a journal called The Personalist. And guess who attacked with vehemence the philosophy of personalism? Russia.
Yeah, absolutely.
And why do you think?
Yeah.
Why do you think?
Incompatible with Marxism.
It's incompatible with Marxism, and it begins to hint of a spiritual dimension, right? And so they were ruthless in their attack on personalism. Personalism as a school no longer exists. I was told by the chair at USC, said, well, there's a few pockets still in Poland because of Pope John Paul II. But I think we have an obligation to help clarify some of these concepts. And I think that's why we have a foreword. Because I believe, Tom, am I correct in this, that personality is somewhere in that foreword?
Several times.
So anyway, let's read a little more.
Okay, who's up next? Neil? Here, maybe he's going to need that.
The vulnerability of materialism, how foolish it is for material-minded man to allow such vulnerable theories as those of mechanistic universe to deprive him of the vast spiritual resources of the personal experience of true religion. Facts never quarrel with the real spiritual faith, theories do. Better that science should be devoted to the destruction of superstition rather than attempting the overthrow of religious faith, human belief in spiritual realities, and divine values. Science should do for man materially what religion does for him spiritually, extend the horizon of life and enlarge his personality. True science can have no lasting quarrel with true religion. The scientific method is merely an intellectual yardstick wherewith to measure material adventures and physical achievements. But being material and wholly intellectual, it is utterly useless in the evaluation of spiritual realities and religious experiences. The inconsistency of the modern mechanist is, if this were merely a material universe and man only a machine, such a man would be wholly unable to recognize himself as machine, and likewise, would such a machine man be wholly unconscious to the fact of the existence of such a material universe. The materialistic dismay and despair of a mechanistic science has failed to recognize the fact of the spirit indwelt mind of the scientist, whose very supermaterial insight formulates those mistaken and self-contradictory concepts of a materialistic universe. Paradise values of eternity and infinity, of truth, beauty, and goodness are concealed within the facts of the phenomenon of the universes of time and space. But it requires the eye of faith in the spirit-born mortal to detect and discern these spiritual values.
Go ahead and read to the end of the page there, if you would.
The realities and values of spiritual progress are not a psychologic projection, a mere glorified daydream of the material mind. Such things are the spiritual forecast of the indwelling adjuster, the Spirit of God living in the mind of man. And let not your dabblings with the faintly glimpsed findings of relativity disturb your concepts of the eternity and infinity of God. And in all your solicitation concerning the necessity for self-expression, do not make the mistake of failing to provide for a juster expression, the manifestation of your real and better self.
Beautiful. Okay, any thoughts? Ralph, pass that mic down.
Yes, I have a question, a serious personal question that I have, is what do they mean to tell us, to convey to us here, where they mention, let not your dabblings with the faintly glimpsed findings of relativity disturb your concepts of the eternity and infinity of God?
Any of my physicists want to, George?
This is what the point I was trying to make before about absolute relativity.
Right.
What happened when Einstein, it was just the right time. Apparently, a lot of people were ready to hear this. They were ready to get rid of the absolute. And Einstein was the excuse. And they said, aha, here's scientific proof. There is no absolute. So that's, I mean, you know, if you're a student of the art of the early part of the century,
right.
I mean, you can see the cosmic alienation just screaming out of all of these different works of art. People are alienated from the universe. They don't fit in anymore. There's no absolute. The whole ground has been cut from under civilization. This is the way, I mean, that's, if you, at least that's what a lot of art critics that I've read have said.
Yes, true.
That, you know, this is, art reflects things that people are feeling but haven't quite gotten around to recognizing yet. And so I think that's what they're talking about here. And they're saying that's the wrong interpretation of what was discovered in 1905. Mm-hmm. That doesn't prove there is no absolute, which is the way people interpret it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the message that they're trying to say. Don't be fooled. Don't be taken in by the charlatans who tell you what it means.
Do you think it also includes the concept of relativity within the universe? That is, that there's no fixed point within the universe.
I think that's why they've put it.
It's exactly what it means.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In other words, when, like I said, the times were ripe for, apparently, to hear this idea that, oh, we don't have to worry about the absolute. In other words, we don't have to worry about God because He is the absolute. Mm-hmm. So this was the excuse that a lot of people were waiting for. And so they said, oh, now we have scientific justification.
Right, yes.
But in other words, they're just rationalizing. There's nothing in relativity. You know, one of the fundamental postulates of special relativity is that the speed of light is a universal constant.
That's an absolute.
In other words, there's an absolute constant upon which special relativity is based.
Right.
It's not the speed of light varies, you know, no, it's an absolute constant. But, you know, if you read the development, they never use the word absolute, but there's absolutely no exception to it. So again, they're playing with language, and it's because people always like to put their own little spin on things. They're interpreting things, but they're interpreting it in a way which is a little bit more consistent with their personal outlook.
Which is a function of their personal experience.
Exactly.
So at the beginning of the 20th century, most scientists felt that most of the scientific issues had been solved. And they felt that they were on the edge of a golden age. In fact, Auguste Comte, who's one of the fathers of sociology, said we need to replace the pantheon of saints with the pantheon of scientists. And he declared himself as the Pope. And he said that science is the new religion. And most people in the beginning of the 20th century felt that way. But then something happened to jar their faith. I would say the first piece that fell, the first shoe that fell, was the sinking of the Titanic.
Yeah.
And then 2 years, almost to a day after that, was the advent of World War I. And at the end of World War I, you had the Spanish flu, which killed nearly 50 million people around the world. So at that point, theology took a tank, right? At the beginning of the 20th century, Paul Tillich says he was at the railroad station when all of these books, which is one of, again, the sources for the Urantia book, all of these books were going out across Europe declaring the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. After the events of World War I and the Spanish flu and the so many things that had occurred, you had the advent of Karl Barth. And Karl Barth was a neoconservative who basically said, God is absolute. You can't have an experience with him. You have to just have faith and hope that it's going to work out, and that basically the dogma of the church is what we need to follow. Well, thinking men and women said, I don't think so, especially after the trauma that we've just experienced. And we're going now into the 30s with the Depression. We're going now into World War II. We're going to the atomic age. We're going into the Holocaust. We're going into the destruction of the environment. This has been an age of trauma. And so it's no, again, we don't get some of the cultural dimensions in the book here. There's absolute reason why so many people are so skeptical and cynical about religion. You get this?
Yeah.
Why so many, right, Jewish people don't want anything to do with religion, right? Elie Wiesel, who's one of my teachers, said, that night my God died.
Yeah.
The night his train pulled into Auschwitz, right? So this was the 20th century, and this is what we're dealing with, and this is what the revelators are dealing with. And so it calls for what? It calls for transformed individuals, right? It calls for each of us to engage, right, Josh, in a quality of self-transformation. If we don't do that, then shame on us. We have a book in our laps, and that's about it.
Adjust your expression.
Exactly. That's what it says. Okay. Anybody else?
Maybe I'll take.
Yeah.
There's I don't know how to teach children how to love God. I think if I was a parent, that would make it a little easier, but I think people get opinions from people that they know, celebrities, stars. Even now, when I watch sports, somebody hits a home run or a grand slam, and they point up there. You know, it's like inspirational a little bit because I know what he's saying. Even though I don't know what his religion is, but he might even, give this Trinity sign, or and it reminds me of something because I have that background.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in a church, Catholic family, and not overly Catholic. I mean, my mom sometimes would. I mean, it's almost nice that she would say, let's go to the early mass to get it over with. I mean, it's but she was devout, but still she was realistic. And then, so there's stars too, like who are God-knowing mortals, like the Beatles. I mean, I know that each one of them believed in God, and I heard one story of like a song can really change, people's minds. And there's like an ambiguous song by John Lennon where he says, "Imagine no religion."
Mm-hmm.
And that always, hit me like, I don't know about that part of the song, And the story that I heard was by Neil Aspinall, who was he was in with the Beatles from the beginning. He was just a friend of them, and he did services for them at the Apple offices. And he was going in. He saw this room he never saw before. It was a refrigerated room, and it had all of John Lennon's fur coats in it. And he looks at John and said, "Imagine no possessions." John says, "Yeah, it's just a bloody song." So, but he, inadvertently, he had a lot of effect on people.
In fact, yeah.
And I think that I don't know how much a sports star pointing up and indicating, thank God for my health and my talent, or that, or just happy, And so I guess that might help, songs. If there's a mention of guardian angels in a song, or just something that might be just one little piece of the song that mentions something that's inspirational, I think that's really good. It doesn't happen very much, but maybe just any love song is a start.
Yeah, very good, Dave. Thank you so much. Okay.
Just to comment on that, I think probably John Lennon was the only Beatle who was an atheist. I think his song "Imagine" is a version of utopian socialism, with the abolition of private property, the abolition of the belief in God, religion, borders. The only thing he didn't mention was that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels believed in was a dissolution of the family. That didn't make its way into the Communist Manifesto. Engels wanted to put it in, but Marx told him to take it out. It's too controversial.
Amen to that.
But in the cultural thing, it's something you brought up too, is that it does have a big influence on us. These, I look at sitcoms. If you go back when I grew up,
Oh yeah.
Leave It to Beaver was Make Room for Daddy. It was Father Knows Best. These were families with moral fathers and mothers. And look what you have now. I mean,
Seinfeld.
A show about nothing.
About nothing.
About nothing. I think it was Dennis Prager asked Woody Allen one time, he was watching the Lakers game, and he said, "Is this important?" And Woody Allen said, "It's as important as anything else." That's the outcome of materialism. There's the relativity of there's no absolute truth, let alone an absolute source of
Truth be in goodness.
that George was talking about. But I actually had a question to George on that one, because my impression is that Einstein's theory resulted in the idea, ultimately, of a first cause, which is, according to, say, Gerald Schroeder, for example, is the most important scientific finding that demonstrates the proof of an absolute God. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
So your question is, Einstein proved there was a first cause?
Well, no, it wasn't the theory of relativity. Didn't that ultimately lead to the idea of the expanding universe, and therefore the Big Bang, and therefore a first cause of time and space?
Yeah, one particular solution of the general relativity equations was was developed by Friedman. There are many different, there's no standard solution. There are many possible solutions, and one is the Friedman equation, and the way that works is space expands uniformly in all directions from every place in space at the same time. So you can't imagine it. It's like every point inside a balloon is in the middle of the balloon.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, no, you can't. You just can't visualize it. But that's the way it works. That's why they can say the universe is isotropic, because every point is at the center of the universe. Even if you go a billion light years that way, you're still at the center of the universe. So it's a whole different geometry. It's in which there is no center, or every point is the center. So it was Lemaitre who said, we can use this equation and go back in time and say, well, we started from a little tiny thing and it all just So it really was Lemaitre who came up with the idea, based on Einstein's.
Georges Lemaitre shared that idea that the universe had an isotropic center that was pre-geometry and was before what we know of as the universe of space and time. And he was explaining this at a series of lectures in Pasadena, California in 1933. And he was traveling with Einstein. They traveled together. After the lecture, Einstein stood up and he said, "That is the most satisfying explanation of creation that I've ever listened to." So they were in agreement on that. They had a real sense that the universe did have an absolute isotropic center and beginning point. I find that very encouraging.
Very nice. Thank you very much, Josh. So, did anybody remember on page 215 what is required to solve or produce universe wisdom? An understanding of origin,
History.
History.
Origin and destiny.
and destiny. This is often quoted in 215. But what's not often quoted is that in the religion papers, and also back here, they speak of origins, values, and goals. Origins, values, and goals. But there's another section of the book that speaks of origins, relativities, and destiny. Look it up. And the question is, you know, we were kind of slamming on relativities there, but I think it's both and, yes and, right? So the theory of relativity, yes and. And so relativities, I think, when they speak about how do you get cosmic wisdom, origin, history, but you can replace that word history with values and with relativities. That's worth thinking about.
Well, the terminology is our dabbling in it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so, Joanne.
I have 3 devices going. Where are we? What paragraph are we?
Right here. If this were.
If the universe were. I know I moved my page. Oh, if this were only a material universe, material man would never be able to arrive at the concept of the mechanistic character of such an exclusively material existence. This very mechanistic concept of the universe is in itself a non-material phenomenon of mind, and all mind is of non-material origin, no matter how thoroughly it may appear to be materially conditioned and mechanistically controlled. The partially evolved mental mechanism of mortal man is not over-endowed with consistency and wisdom. Man's conceit often outruns his reason and eludes his logic.
Very good. Thank you, Joanne. Any thoughts?
How true.
Yes.
That wasn't even there
That was
before.
a statement of truth, right?
Yeah, that's a fact.
Well, the man's conceit often outruns his reason. Who was it said that cosmologists are never in doubt, but always...
You're always wrong, but never in doubt.
Always wrong, but never in doubt.
I already forgot it. I said I was going to remember that, and I forgot it already. But it's funny.
We have more people on the screen. Anybody want to make a comment?
Michael.
Yeah.
There's your boy.
Oh, very good.
Feel free to unmute yourself.
And raise your hand if you have any questions. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was actually still looking at the previous paragraph. And I'm sorry, I came in the middle, so I apologize if this was already discussed, but the sentence about self-expression and adjuster expression. And, I know we know from our studies that a personal adjuster, the adjuster relies on us to be able to reach fulfillment and expression and become, the fusion to become personal with us. But I find it interesting that it's in this paragraph on the dangers of materialism, I guess as a reminder that materialism not only hurts ourselves, it's hurting the fragment that's with us. Preventing too much materialistic expression is preventing the adjuster expression. And it's something I'm definitely going to think about, how to foster not just communication with the adjuster, which is mentioned in a number of places, but foster adjuster expression.
Beautiful.
Good point. Great point. Great.
Yeah. And you should all know, in doing the history, whenever you see something italicized, they were told to italicize it for importance. Thank you, Michael. Okay. So we said the last passage was true, so we're going to move on. Must be a revelation. Betty?
It's Betty's turn. Is Betty not reading?
The very pessimism.
What paragraph are we on?
The very pessimism.
Oh, okay. The very pessimism of the most pessimistic materialist is, in and of itself, sufficient proof that the universe of the pessimists is not wholly material. Both optimism and pessimism are concept reactions in a mind conscious of values as well as of facts. If the universe were truly what the materialist regards it to be, man as a human machine would then be devoid of all conscious recognition of that very fact. Without the consciousness of the concept of values within the spirit-born mind, the fact of universe materialism and the mechanistic phenomena of the universe operation would be wholly unrecognized by man. One machine cannot be conscious of the nature or value of another machine. A mechanistic philosophy of life and the universe cannot be scientific because science recognizes and deals only with materials and facts. Philosophy is inevitably super scientific. Man is a material fact of nature, but his life is a phenomenon which transcends the material levels of nature in that it exhibits the control attributes of mind and the creative qualities of spirit. The sincere effort of man to become a mechanist represents the tragic phenomenon of that man's futile effort to commit intellectual and moral suicide. But he cannot do it. If the universe were only material and man only a machine, there would be no science to embolden the scientist to postulate this mechanization of the universe. Machines cannot measure, classify, nor evaluate themselves. Such a scientific piece of work could be executed only by some entity of supermachine status. If universe reality is only one vast machine, then man must be outside of the universe and apart from it in order to recognize such a fact and become conscious of the insight of such an evaluation.
Thanks, Phil. So is it true machines cannot measure, classify, nor evaluate themselves?
How about Microsoft Diagnostics? It could be very dangerous.
I'm asking. What do you think?
How about Neil?
They can measure things, but they're programmed by a human agent who has agency, who does it.
Right. Yeah.
Just to follow through, has a machine ever asked a question on its own?
Oh, man.
It's funny you should ask that because as we've been reading this, I have a little anecdote. Some friends of mine were just sitting and watching TV, and my friend's husband got a call from his crazy sister who blah, 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 blah. And he hung up the phone and he turned to his wife. He goes, "Oh my God, I just can't stand it anymore." His phone says, "I'm sorry, would you like a hug?" She said, "We laughed ourselves silly." But it's kind of creepy. The phones are listening, and obviously if somebody said something like, "I can't take it anymore," you know, someone programmed into their phone to make an intervention.
Just for laughs, I have to continue this. I was watching on Netflix, the program was Schitt's Creek, if anybody, it's a hysterical program. Well, one day I wanted to turn it on again, and I can talk into my my remote. Yes, I know, it's amazing. So I wanted to ask for that particular Netflix series, and I went, I want Schitt's, and I couldn't remember the last part, and my TV came back and said to me, "I'm sorry, we can accept that kind of language."
A mother programmed it?
I was horrified.
Sounds like Hal. 2001 Space Odyssey.
I've never recovered from that.
I'm sorry, Jim.
Yes.
I can't do that.
I can't do that. I won't.
Yeah, Hal was alive and well.
Yeah.
To answer your question of, has a computer ever created a...
Can he ask a
Right.
question on its own?
So, you know, much of the concern about runaway AI and reaching a singularity, well, I'm just mystified by that one, how so many people believe it. But it's predicated on the ideal materialism that the brain is a computer. And if the brain is a computer, then a computer can be a brain. Brains can certainly do those things, so, or minds, which they ignore. Computers are purely algorithmic. Only by accident could they ever produce a string of characters that could produce some meaningful text, and that is so probabilistically, such a low probability that I'm not worried about it. So.
A half serious thing is, we're not that complicated. I think a machine, some of us. I'm only halfway serious.
Waving.
Anybody waving up there?
Bennett.
Go ahead.
Bennett.
Yeah, so a couple of different things, because there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, just a little bit.
I wouldn't want to complicate things by any stretch, but in answer to that computer wanting to know if I want a hug, absolutely, but not from you.
Oh.
So I'm going to throw two quick quotes out here and then probably go in a different direction. The element of error present in human religious experience is directly proportional to the content of materialism, which contaminates the spiritual concept of the universal Father. And secondly, meanings are non-existent in a wholly sensory or material world. Meanings and values are only perceived in the inner or supermaterial spheres of human experience. So, with those in mind, I think often about the conundrum of people saying, why does God let bad things happen to good people? Or some version of that. Or God can't be real because he allowed this to happen, as someone mentioned earlier regarding some of the Jewish people confronted with the Holocaust. And it's certainly a valid emotional, present world reaction to such a negative and horrendous stimulus as that all was. But the bottom line in all of that is that it's based on the assumption that God's going to do what we expect God to do.
Yeah.
which is the same errant phenomenon when the Urantia book talks about how many people have wrecked their faith on the shoals of Jesus doing whatever they want him to do because they prayed in his name. You're all familiar with that concept. And so how long will we continue to wreck our faith and our ideology on these ideas that God's going to behave the way we want him to behave instead of us perhaps learning to behave the way God actually behaves? And now I'm going to digress into this, back into the field of science. For many years, physicists have been discussing this idea of a theory of everything. But of the three components of universe reality, physical, mindal, and spiritual, they're only considering what's in the physical reality. And they want to define everything based on the physical universe. And I would suggest that that's the least of the three components. You have mind, which is the harmonizing and the unifying factor, and you have spirit, which is the real source and the progenitor of everything. And how can we consider the least of all of that and try to define everything?
Good question.
Thank you, Bennett.
Just because science only values what's in the material spectrum.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bennett.
Yeah.
So we're going to jump now to one more paragraph to read, and then we're going to do a remembrance.
Oh.
Okay? So we're going to jump to 2081. And I think you're on, Marjorie, and it's the paragraph that begins, "Secularism can never bring peace."
Okay. Have the,
It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs.
yeah, I've got it, but I just need the microphone. It's the sixth paragraph, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
From there. Okay.
All right. Secularism can never bring peace to mankind. Nothing can take the place of God in human society. But mark you well, do not be quick to surrender the beneficent gains of the secular revolt from ecclesiastical totalitarianism. Sorry about the pronunciation. Western civilization today enjoys many liberties and satisfactions as a result of the secular revolt. The great mistake of secularism was this: in revolting against the almost total control of life by religious authority, and after attaining the liberation from such ecclesiastical tyranny, the secularists went on to institute a revolt against God himself, sometimes tacitly and sometimes openly. To the secularist revolt, you owe the amazing creativity of American industrialism and the unprecedented material progress of Western civilization. And because of the secularist revolt went too far and lost sight of God and true religion, there also followed the unlooked-for harvest of world wars and international unsettledness. It is not necessary to sacrifice faith in God in order to enjoy the blessings of the modern secularist revolt. Tolerance, social service, democratic government, and civil liberties. It was not necessary for the secularists to antagonize true religion in order to promote science and to advance education. But secularism is not the sole parent of all these recent gains in the enlargement of living. Behind the gains of the 20th century are not only science and secularism, but also the unrecognized and unacknowledged spiritual workings of the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Without God, without religion, scientific secularism can never coordinate its forces, harmonize its divergent and rivalrous interests, races, and nationalisms. This secularistic human society, notwithstanding its unparalleled materialistic achievement, is slowly disintegrating. The chief cohesive force resisting this disintegration of antagonism is nationalism, and nationalism is the chief barrier to world peace. The inherent weakness of secularism is that it discards ethics and religion for politics and power. You simply cannot establish the brotherhood of men while ignoring or denying the fatherhood of God. Secular social and political optimism is an illusion. Without God, neither freedom and liberty nor property and wealth will lead to peace. The complete secularization of science, education, industry, and society can lead only to disaster. During the first third of the 20th century, Urantians killed more human beings than were killed during the whole of the Christian dispensation up to that time. And this is only the beginning of the dire harvest of materialism and secularism. Still more terrible destruction is yet to come.
It's prophetic, fortunately.
So we can say now, looking back, that during the second two-thirds of the 20th century, more people were killed by a long shot than the first third of the 20th century. Over 115 recorded wars, over 100 million people killed in the name of nationalism and this or that ideology. And most of those people, back in the day when the British fought the United States of America, it was soldiers who killed soldiers. Mm-hmm. But of those 100 million people, most of them were civilians. Mm-hmm. So we can look back, and to me, this is the impulse, part of the impulse of why we need to, religion must be active, and why we need to take notice and we need to engage. As I tell my students, all hands on deck, all oars in the water. So thank you for engaging in this study group. And now we're going to